When I was in my early 20s, I felt really uncomfortable and out of place, and I was like, I don't know like who I am. I'm not Asian enough to be Asian, and I'm not white enough to be white, and it's like you don't fit into either world.
Hi, Rena. How are you?
I'm like, surely you can't have like a foot in both worlds. You have to like know who you are, so I need to pick one or the other. I feel like we apologize a lot for like things about ourselves that like we can't help. I'm Caroline Donica, and I'm a teacher, an actress, a writer, director, and I live in Atlanta, Georgia.
Okay, so today we're going to be learning about the power of describing places.
I teach English in the mornings. All of my Chinese students assume that I'm Chinese because I look very Chinese. It has also caused several interesting moments where like a parent will come on and they'll start talking to me in Mandarin. I'm like, I'm Korean. Where I'm from turns out to be a really complicated question. I grew up in a tiny little town called Longview, East Texas. I was adopted at 6 months old from Seoul, South Korea. Growing up as a Korean kid with white parents in the South was challenging. Especially at the time when we were adopted, there was a lot of, you should be so grateful, your parents rescued you. There was a lot of white savior complex. Code switching just became like an inherent part of my nature. Whether you're code switching to try to fit in with a group, whether you're code switching because it makes you feel safer, or even like what we're doing right now. I mean, to some level, I'm code switching right now. My best friend growing up, his first memory of me, I was all of 12 or 13 years old, and he looked at me and he said, "What are you?" I turned around and just snapped in his face, and I was like, "I am a strong, independent American woman who doesn't need this from you right now." I would get the question all the time, "What are you?" And it just drove me nuts, because I was like, one, why does it matter? What does it have to do with you? I never ask you that. When you say a question like, "What are you?" you're objectifying the person. Even the question itself, what are you, is like almost like an object. You're not even human anymore. There's a higher cop presence. I think it's probably because there were a few attacks during the pandemic on some Asian people in Atlanta and the surrounding areas. I was in Savannah, and so I was masked up. A lot of other people weren't. I got a lot of glares, especially out in the parking lot, and I decided I was gonna order my groceries online for a while till I was sure I wasn't gonna get mugged in a parking lot. I don't think my parents ever really out and out stated that the cultural difference between being white and being Korean. They always told us we were adopted, and we had books on South Korea and Korean culture and some Korean fairy tales, but we never talked about the difference between being white and Korean in a predominantly white area in white America, and we never talked about how we would be treated differently. And that, I think, was one of the hardest things that happened in my early 20s that I had to come to an understanding and realization of, is that I'm not treated the same as my parents. Like, I'm not seen the same as my parents. Once I hit my early 20s, I did try to get more in touch with some Korean aspects. So I went to a Korean market in Houston, and I would go to Korean restaurants. So food became kind of my in to Korean culture because I love to cook and I love to experiment in cooking. It can be uncomfortable at times, for sure, going into stores, and definitely if I have to ask for help. When I traveled to Spain or to Mexico, there wasn't an assumption that I was supposed to be able to speak the language because of how I looked. Whereas if I go into an Asian market, there is an assumption and an expectation that I should be able to do it. Tonight, where I'm gonna have our neighbors come over and join us for dinner, and also my roommates will be here. Bulgogi is one of my favorites because it's Korean barbecue basically, and you know, being a Southern girl and from Texas, I really love it. So basically all the recipes in my little cookbook, my blue book, they're all ones that I found online, and then I adjusted them to work with what I have. I know that in Asian cooking, balance is really important. They're always trying to find the umami. So it's like a mixture of sour, salty, savory, and sweet. Oh, and spicy. It's like perfect balance. I don't add in the spicy because I'm a baby and I can't have spicy food. I can't do it. I always used to joke that I'm a bad Korean because I can't eat spicy food. Hi, welcome. It's a little smoky. This is bulgogi.
Thank you.
And that little tiny dish of greens is manari. Okay, who's ready to eat? Me.
Us.
I like to put the meat in the rice. Can you hand me the manari? I think it varies how I speak with each person depending on the situation. And if we're in a group setting or if I'm one-on-one. Because Jonathan and I have a special thing that only happens when it's just the two of us around. Jonathan actually calls me Cece sometimes, and he's like, that's the other side of Caroline.
She gets a little sassy.
And then when I'm with Callie, I think definitely more of my southern side comes out. I mean, Callie's basically been around for my entire journey of discovering my Korean roots.
Your entire life.
Because we're just like, we're sisters.
In college, you were like, oh yeah, I really don't like care to know my birth parents, and but then like as we got into like grad school, you were like talking about how maybe you might be open to like finding them.
I just recently learned that she's adopted from South Korea. It was mind blowing. I was like, wait, what?
You know, someone did tell my dad when my brother was a lot younger. They were like, wow, Forrest looks so much like you. My dad was like, does he though?
Do people
Does
say
he
that
really?
like out of obligation,
Yeah.
or do you think it's ignorance or both?
I
think
don't
it's
know.
both.
I don't know if it's obligation or if it's just expectation. That you assume that a child
You
must
think
look
that
like
they're
their
related,
parent.
so your brain puts things together
Yeah,
that make
fills
them
in the
related.
gaps that aren't real. I think everyone, in their own way, is constantly on a journey to finding their authentic self and finding their purpose in life. And I think for me, a lot of the journey has been learning how to know who I am without really fully knowing who I am. We're truly at our happiest and most fulfilled if we're able to just let go of expectations. Learning how to let go of those things has really given me a lot more serenity and peace at being who I am right now, and learning, you know, to accept the journey of finding who I am.